The vineyard's secret. I never expected to find a fortune in failure. That's what my family called it, a failure. A worthless plot of land tucked away in California's least prestigious wine region while my brother received the family's celebrated Napa Valley estate. But sometimes, what looks like a curse is actually a blessing wrapped in dusty soil and forgotten vines. My name is Sophia Blackwell, youngest daughter of Edward and Eleanor Blackwell, third-generation vintners whose name had become synonymous with luxury wines and old money. Our family's Napa Valley vineyard, Blackwell Estates, produced award-winning Cabernet Sauvignon that graced the tables of presidents and celebrities alike. The Blackwell name was legendary in American wine circles, a dynasty built on my grandfather's vision and my father's ruthless business acumen. My older brother, Marcus, was the golden child. He had graduated from UC Davis with a degree in viticulture and enology, took a perfectly orchestrated tour through French and Italian wineries, and returned to become the face of Blackwell Estates. He was charming, conventionally successful, and most importantly, he fulfilled every expectation my parents had for him. I, on the other hand, was the family disappointment. Instead of following the prescribed path, I studied environmental science and sustainable agriculture. I believed that the future of winemaking lay in organic practices and climate adaptability, ideas my father dismissed as hippie fantasies that would never produce wines worthy of the Blackwell name. The market doesn't care about sustainability, Sophia, he'd lectured me countless times. They care about taste, prestige, and tradition. But I cared. And my grandfather James, the original Blackwell visionary, had cared too, though my father had systematically erased that part of our family history. The day my parents' private helicopter crashed on their way to a wine auction in Aspen, I was working as a consultant for a small organic farm in Oregon. The news hit me like a physical blow, not just the loss of my parents, but the sudden realization that all those opportunities to reconcile, to make them understand my path, were gone forever. The reading of the will took place in the Grand Library of Blackwell Estates. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes on viticulture created an imposing backdrop as we gathered around the antique mahogany table. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the polished wood. The room smelled of old books, beeswax, and the faint scent of oak barrels that permeated every corner of the main house. Marcus sat at the head of the table, our Uncle Richard beside him. As the family's financial advisor, Richard had always aligned himself with power, and in the Blackwell family, that meant siding with my father and brother. I chose a seat at the far end of the table, feeling like an outsider in my own family home. The family attorney, Mr. Patterson, began reading through the will's formalities. The first bombshell dropped almost immediately. The entirety of Blackwell Estates, including all land holdings in Napa Valley, the winery operations, distribution networks, and brand intellectual property, is hereby bequeathed to Marcus Edward Blackwell. My brother's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes darted toward me briefly. Not with sympathy, but with something closer to vindication. Mr. Patterson continued, to our daughter, Sophia Eleanor Blackwell, we leave the old Madrona Valley property in Mendocino County. A strange silence fell over the room. The Madrona Valley property was a forgotten piece of land my father had purchased decades ago and then abandoned when the soil proved too challenging for his traditional methods. It was 40 acres of difficult terrain that had become a family joke, Edward Blackwell's one failed investment. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. Well, that's something, I suppose. Marcus's lips curved into a patronizing smile. Sophia, if you ever want to sell it, I'd be happy to take it off your hands. It would make a decent weekend retreat with some renovation. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. My parents' final message to me couldn't have been clearer. You are not worthy of the Blackwell legacy. Thank you for the offer, I said, keeping my voice steady. But I think I'll hold on to it for now. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Marcus inherited over $200 million in assets, while I received a parcel of land worth perhaps $50,000 at most. As everyone departed, Mr. Patterson handed me a simple envelope containing the deed and a single key. That night, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, turning the key over in my hands. Something about it seemed oddly familiar, triggering a distant memory. My grandfather James had taken me to the Madrona Valley property when I was just 8 years old. He'd shown me something there, a secret he said was just for us. I'd forgotten all about it until now. 3 days later, I drove my beat-up Subaru along the winding coastal highway toward Mendocino County. The Madrona Valley property was about 3 hours north of San Francisco, and as I traveled farther from the manicured perfection of Napa, the landscape grew wilder and more rugged. A weathered wooden sign marked the entrance to the property, Blackwell Land, Madrona Valley. The rutted dirt road hadn't been maintained in years, and thick grass grew in the center strip. As I navigated the bumpy terrain, memories began to surface, my grandfather's calloused hand holding mine as we walked this same path, his enthusiastic voice explaining his vision for this land. The small farmhouse came into view, its white paint peeling and shutters hanging crookedly. Behind it stood a large barn and, stretching out in every direction, rows upon rows of gnarled grapevines that had been left to grow wild for decades. I parked and approached the house cautiously. The front door creaked open when I inserted the key, revealing a dusty interior frozen in time. Sheets covered the furniture, and cobwebs draped from the ceiling. But unlike the opulent Blackwell estate, this place felt real, a home rather than a showpiece. After exploring the house, I walked out to survey the vineyard. The vines were overgrown but still alive, their twisted trunks speaking of resilience. As I moved among them, I noticed something odd. The grape varieties appeared to be unusual hybrids, not the standard Cabernet or Chardonnay my family typically grew. "What were you working on here, Grandpa?" I whispered to the wind. Then I remembered, the barn. That's where he'd taken me all those years ago, showing me what he called his laboratory. I hurried toward the large structure, its weathered boards glowing orange in the late afternoon sun. The barn door was secured with a padlock that looked newer than the building itself. My key fit perfectly, and with a satisfying click, the lock opened. I pushed the heavy door, and it swung inward with a low groan. At first glance, the barn appeared ordinary, dusty farming equipment, stacked barrels, and shelves lined with tools. But as I moved deeper inside, I noticed an inconsistency in the dimensions. The exterior suggested a larger space than what I could see. I ran my hand along the back wall, remembering my grandfather's playful instructions from long ago. 3 taps on the wall, then pushed the loose board to the right. Following his directions, I tapped 3 times and pushed. To my amazement, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden door. My heart pounding, I stepped through into a secret room. What I found took my breath away. Unlike the dusty, abandoned barn, this room was sealed and preserved. Rows of filing cabinets lined one wall. Glass front coolers containing soil samples stood against another. A large desk dominated the center of the room, covered with maps, notebooks, and soil analysis charts. And in the corner, a small wine cellar, perhaps 50 bottles, each carefully labeled with handwritten tags. Madrona Valley Test Batch Number 17, I read aloud, lifting one of the bottles. Heat-resistant hybrid, harvest 1985. I set the bottle down and turned to the desk, where I found a leather-bound journal with my grandfather's name embossed on the cover. My hands trembled as I opened it and began to read. July 15, 1982. The vineyards at Madrona may be my greatest achievement, though Edward will never understand. While he pursues perfection in traditional varieties, I've created something revolutionary here: grape hybrids that can withstand higher temperatures and require 60% less water. The test batches are promising, showing complex flavors unlike anything in Napa. The soil here is challenging, but that's precisely what makes it perfect for what's coming. The climate is changing. In 30 years, Napa will struggle while these adaptive varieties thrive. I've mapped the entire property. There's an underground aquifer that will sustain these vines even in drought. Edward thinks I'm wasting my time, but this is the future. Sophia seems to understand, even at her young age. She asks the right questions. Perhaps she'll be the one to carry this forward when the time comes. I read through the night, absorbing decades of my grandfather's work. What he had created was extraordinary, a collection of grape varieties specifically bred to thrive in warmer, drier conditions. He had been preparing for climate change long before it became a mainstream concern. According to his notes, the Madrona Valley property sat atop a natural underground aquifer, a reliable water source that would become increasingly valuable as California faced worsening droughts. He had also developed natural pest-resistant varieties that eliminated the need for harsh chemicals. Most importantly, he had created wine that was exceptional, not despite but because of these sustainable methods. The last entry, dated just weeks before his death, read: "I've shown Sophia the hidden room. She's too young to understand now, but someday she'll return. Edward will never appreciate what I've built here. He's too blinded by tradition and prestige. But Sophia has the heart to see it. I've left everything she'll need to make this place flourish. The patents for the hybrid varieties are in the safe behind the soil charts. The combination is her birthday. When the climate shifts, as it inevitably will, these vines will be worth more than all of Blackwell estates. More importantly, they represent a path forward, a way to adapt rather than cling to outdated methods. Sophia will understand when the time comes." I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. My grandfather hadn't just left me a piece of land, he'd left me his life's work, his true legacy. And somehow, he'd known I would be the one to appreciate it. The next morning, I opened the safe using my birth date as the combination. Inside, I found patent documents for 17 different grape varieties, detailed maps of the underground aquifer, and a USB drive containing all his research digitized. I also found a letter addressed to me. "My dearest Sophia. If you're reading this, you found your way back to Madrona Valley. I always knew you would. These vines are my legacy, not the famous Blackwell estates, but these hardy, resilient plants that represent the future of winemaking in a changing world. I've protected these patents from your father, who would have dismissed their value. They're yours now. Use them wisely. In the right hands, they could revolutionize sustainable viticulture. In the wrong hands, they could be exploited or suppressed to protect the status quo. I believe in you, Sophia. You've always seen the world differently, just as I did. That's not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. With love and faith, Grandpa James." I spent the next week living in the farmhouse, exploring every inch of the property. During the day, I examined the vines, taking samples and comparing them to my grandfather's notes. At night, I opened bottle after bottle of his experimental wines, marveling at their unique character, complex, surprising, and unlike anything I'd tasted from Blackwell Estates. These weren't just good wines, they were revolutionary. Heat-resistant, drought-tolerant, pest-resistant, and producing exceptional flavor profiles. In a world increasingly affected by climate change, these varieties could change everything. I knew I had to move quickly. With a newfound purpose, I made 3 pivotal phone calls. First, I contacted Dr. Eliza Chen, a former professor of mine who had gone on to become a leading expert in sustainable agriculture. I described my grandfather's work in vague terms, asking if she would be interested in evaluating some unusual grape varieties. "Sophia," she said after a long pause, "if what you're describing is accurate, this could be significant. I can be there next week." When Dr. Chen arrived at Madrona Valley, she spent days analyzing the vines and soil samples. On the final evening, she sat across from me at the farmhouse's kitchen table, her expression serious. "These hybrids are at least 20 years ahead of current research," she said, pushing her glasses up. "The drought tolerance alone is remarkable, but the pest resistance without sacrificing flavor profile, that's unprecedented." She leaned forward. "Sophia, do you understand what you have here?" I nodded slowly. "I think I do. Your grandfather's work could help winemakers adapt to climate change without resorting to GMOs or excessive chemical interventions. It's exactly what the industry needs, whether they know it or not." My second call was to Julian Reeves, an attorney specializing in agricultural patents and intellectual property. Unlike our family lawyer, Julian had built his reputation defending small farmers against corporate giants. "I need to protect some very valuable agricultural patents," I explained. "And I need to do it in a way that can't be traced back to me or my family name." Julian was intrigued enough to fly out from Chicago. After reviewing the patents, he whistled low. "These are comprehensive. Your grandfather was thorough." He glanced up at me. "But why the secrecy? These could be worth millions." "Because my family would try to take control," I said simply. "And they wouldn't use them for the right reasons." With Julian's help, I created Phoenix Viticulture, a new company with a complex ownership structure that obscured my connection to it. We filed updated patents under this new entity, ensuring that my grandfather's work was legally protected. My third call was to Mia Yoshida, a former classmate who had gone on to become a successful venture capitalist with a focus on sustainable agriculture and climate adaptation. "I have something you need to see in person," I told her. "It could change California winemaking forever." Mia was skeptical but curious enough to make the trip. Like Dr. Chen, she was stunned by what she found. "The wine industry is facing a crisis they're barely acknowledging," she said as we walked through the vineyard. "Napa's temperature has risen 2 degrees in the past decade. Water rights are becoming a battleground. Traditional varieties are struggling." She stopped to examine a cluster of grapes. "These could be the solution. I need capital to restore this vineyard and build a proper winery," I told her. "But I want to do it right, sustainable from the ground up." Mia studied me for a moment. "How much do you need?" $5 million to start," I said, having run the numbers carefully. "I can get you 8, she replied without hesitation. "But I want first rights on the next round of funding when you're ready to scale." Within 3 months, Phoenix Viticulture was no longer just a legal entity but a tangible operation. We restored the old farmhouse, built a small but modern winery, and began the careful process of nursery propagation to expand my grandfather's varieties. Dr. Chen joined as our lead viticulturist, bringing with her a team of young, forward-thinking vineyard managers. By the end of the first year, we had planted 20 new acres of vines and produced our first small commercial batch of wine. We chose to release just 2 wines initially, a red blend and a white, both under the label Adaptation. The bottles were elegant but understated, with no mention of the Blackwell name. Instead, We focused our marketing on the sustainable practices and unique resilience of our vineyard. The wines were an immediate critical success. Wine Spectator gave our red blend 94 points, describing it as a bold reinvention of California red, complex, balanced, with surprising notes of black cherry and spice, and a remarkable ability to maintain acidity despite being grown in challenging conditions. The first small production run sold out within days. By the second year, Phoenix Viticulture had become the most talked about new winery in California, with our waiting list growing faster than our production capacity. As our profile rose, it was inevitable that the Blackwell family would take notice. The call came on a Tuesday morning as I was overseeing the installation of our new solar array. Sophia, Marcus's voice was tense. "We need to talk about what you're doing up there in Mendocino." "Hello to you too, brother," I replied, keeping my tone light. "What exactly am I doing that concerns you?" "Phoenix Viticulture," he said, not bothering to hide his irritation. "Did you think I wouldn't figure out it was you?" The timing, the location, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. "I never tried to hide it from you, Marcus," I said, leaning against the railing of the new tasting room that overlooked rows of thriving vines. "I just didn't see any reason to announce it." He paced back and forth, his designer shoes kicking up dust on the newly laid flagstone path. "Do you have any idea what you've done? These patents, these varieties, they should be under the Blackwell name." "They are," I replied calmly. "Just not the name you're thinking of. This is Grandpa James's legacy, not Dad's." Marcus's face flushed. "I've spoken with Uncle Richard and the board. We're prepared to make you an offer for Phoenix Viticulture. A generous one. The company isn't for sale." "Don't be naive, Sophia," he snapped. "These climate-resistant varieties should be part of Blackwell Estates. We're already seeing effects in Napa, reduced yields, changing flavor profiles. The board is concerned about long-term viability." I couldn't help but smile. So Grandpa was right all along. "This isn't about being right," Marcus said, his voice dropping to that smooth, persuasive tone he used to close business deals. "This is about family. About preserving what our parents built." "No," I countered. "It's about preserving what our grandfather built." He knew this day would come. He knew traditional winemaking would face challenges it wasn't prepared for. That's why he created these varieties. That's why he left them to me. "We're offering $50 million, Marcus said flatly. "That's 10 times what you've raised from your investors." I studied my brother's face, so like our father's, handsome and confident, but with something new there, fear. For the first time in our lives, Marcus Blackwell was afraid of being left behind. "I have a counter-proposal," I said. "Phoenix Viticulture remains independent, but we license specific varieties to Blackwell Estates for use in your Napa vineyards." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You'd make us pay for what should rightfully be ours." "Not pay," I clarified. "Partner. Any wine produced using these varieties would have to follow our sustainable protocols. No excessive chemical interventions, water conservation practices in place, carbon-neutral processing. And a percentage of profits would go to a foundation that helps small vineyards adapt to climate change." "That's not how we operate," he scoffed. "Then that's not how you'll access these grapes," I replied simply. 3 days later, Uncle Richard arrived at Madrona Valley, this time without Marcus. We sat in the farmhouse kitchen, now renovated but still humble compared to the Blackwell estate mansion. "Your brother is stubborn," Richard said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Like your father." "And I'm not?" I asked with a wry smile. Richard chuckled. "You're stubborn like your grandfather." There's a difference. He took a sip of coffee and looked around the kitchen. James loved this place. Edward never understood why. You knew about his work here? I asked, surprised. Richard nodded slowly. Not the details, but enough. Your father and I, we didn't always agree on the direction of the business. James had vision. Edward had ambition. And which did you have, Uncle Richard? Pragmatism, he answered without hesitation. Which is why I'm here. Marcus won't admit it, but Blackwell Estates needs what you have. Last season was our worst in 15 years. This season will be worse. I leaned back in my chair. And what does the pragmatist suggest? A joint venture, he said. Not a licensing deal, not an acquisition. A true partnership between Phoenix and Blackwell. We bring the distribution network, the marketing power, the historical prestige. You bring the innovation, the adaptability, the future. I considered his words. And who would control this joint venture? Equal governance, Richard said. You and Marcus as co-chairs. Me as the tiebreaker, if needed. Marcus would never agree to that. Richard's lips quirked into a half-smile. He already has. 2 weeks later, we announced the formation of Blackwell Phoenix, a new entity focused on climate-adaptive viticulture. The wine world was stunned by the partnership between the established Blackwell dynasty and the upstart Phoenix viticulture. Under the agreement, Phoenix would continue to operate independently, producing our own wines and conducting research. Blackwell Estates would gradually transition portions of their Napa vineyards to our sustainable varieties, creating a new premium line called Evolution. The first release of Evolution wines 2 years later received unprecedented acclaim. Wine enthusiasts named it Wine of the Year, with the lead critic writing, "The Blackwell family has reinvented itself once again, proving that adaptation is the true key to longevity in an industry facing existential challenges." At the grand release party, held at Madrona Valley rather than the opulent Blackwell estate, Marcus and I stood side by side for the first time as equals. The renovated property now featured a stunning glass-walled tasting room that overlooked the vineyards, with the original farmhouse preserved as a testament to our grandfather's vision. He would have loved this, Marcus admitted, watching the sunset paint the vineyards in golden light. Probably more than anything we've done in Napa. He did love it, I replied. That's why he protected it all those years. As guests mingled throughout the property, I slipped away to the barn. The hidden room remained our secret. Marcus knew about the varieties but not about the extensive research behind them. Some things needed to remain sacred. Inside the hidden room, I placed a bottle of our new Evolution Cabernet on my grandfather's desk. The label featured a phoenix rising behind the traditional Blackwell crest, a symbol of rebirth and continuity. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered. We found a way forward. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Dr. Chin pulled me aside. We've completed the analysis of the final set of hybrid varieties, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. The ones from the experimental section at the far end of the property. And? I prompted. They're unlike anything we've seen. They're not just adaptable to heat and drought, they actively sequester carbon at a rate 3 times higher than traditional vines. They could be part of the solution to climate change itself, not just adapting to it. I smiled, thinking of my grandfather's final journal entry that I discovered last month, hidden behind a false panel in the desk. The Madrona varieties are just the beginning. The true revolution lies in the experimental North Field. These vines don't just survive change, they help reverse it. This is my final gift to Sophia, and through her, to the world we're leaving behind. Let's keep that between us for now, I told Dr. Chen. We'll develop them separately, not as part of the Blackwell Phoenix venture. A new company? She asked. I shook my head. A foundation. The James Blackwell Climate Resilience Trust. No patents, no proprietary technology. Just open source solutions for a world that needs them. As the last guests departed, I walked out to the furthest edge of the property, where those special experimental vines grew. In the moonlight, they looked ordinary, just plants doing what plants have always done, converting sunlight to life, adapting, evolving, finding a way forward. My grandfather had seen the challenges coming decades before others acknowledged them. He'd prepared not just a solution for our family business, but a gift for future generations of growers everywhere. What had appeared to be my parents' final rejection, this forgotten piece of land, had turned out to be my greatest inheritance. In failure, I had found fortune. In rejection, I had found purpose. In this overlooked corner of the wine world, I had found a way to honor my grandfather's vision while creating something entirely new. And that, I realized, was the true Blackwell legacy worth preserving. The end.